She didn't even look at Nia when she said it. That was the part that stayed with people afterward, not just the words, but the way Lenora Whitcomb delivered them with the bored confidence of someone swatting a fly. In front of 200 of Manhattan's most powerful people, surrounded by chandeliers that cost more than most people's yearly salary, Lenora looked at the heavyset black woman in the simple green dress and said, "Loud enough for the nearest 30 guests to hear. Excuse me, I think you may have wandered into the wrong room." Then she smiled. Not a cruel smile, worse a patient one. The kind you give someone who doesn't understand the rules yet. The laughter that followed was soft, polite, which somehow made it worse. If you had been standing in that ballroom wearing a dress that cost $48, carrying a glass of water for a sick little boy upstairs, what would you have done? If that had been you, surrounded by people who had already decided, before you opened your mouth, that you didn't belong, what would you have said? That question is what this story is really about. My name is not important. What matters is that I'm going to tell you about the night one woman's quiet dignity walked into a room full of loud money and changed everything. Before we go further, if this is your first time here, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Stories like this one are what we do here, and I promise you do not want to miss what's coming. Drop a comment right now telling me what city or country you're watching from. I genuinely want to know how far this story travels. And if something in the next few minutes hits you somewhere real, please hit that like button. It tells me you're still here, that you're listening. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. The gala had a name, the Whitcomb Foundation Annual Benefit, but in the circles that actually mattered, people just called it Lenora's Night. That was how much this event belonged to one woman. The flowers were her choice. The seating arrangements were her blueprint. The guest list was her architecture, built over 30 years of careful social engineering, every name placed with the precision of someone who understood that power in Manhattan is not about money alone. Money is just the entry fee. Power is about who decides who gets to be in the room. That year, the ballroom of the Ashworth Hotel had been transformed into something out of a dream. Ivory linens, arrangements of white orchids taller than most men, a string quartet tucked near the east wall, and a crowd dressed in things that would not have looked out of place at a European state dinner. Senators moved through clusters of hedge fund managers. The wives of 3 sitting board members of separate Fortune 100 companies air-kissed near the champagne station. A retired ambassador laughed too loudly at something a tech billionaire said. It was, by every external measure, a perfect evening. Nia Holloway had not come for any of it. She had come for water. Specifically, she had come because Eli Kwon, the 8-year-old boy she had spent the last 6 months caring for, had woken up in the hotel suite upstairs with a dry, scratchy throat and a temperature that had climbed 0.2 of a degree in the last hour. Eli was the kind of sick child who didn't complain. That was the part that broke Nia's heart about him. He would lie there with his eyes too bright and his breathing slightly too shallow, and when she asked how he felt, he would say fine in a voice that was clearly not fine, but he did not want to cause trouble. He never wanted to cause trouble. So, when he'd whispered that his throat hurt, Nia had squeezed his hand, tucked the blanket up under his chin, and told him she was going to find him some water. Cool water, not cold. She knew exactly how he liked it. Problem was that the suite's minibar was empty of still water, and the floor butler was somewhere unreachable at this hour because half the hotel staff had been redirected to serve the event downstairs. Which meant Nia had one option: go down to the ballroom level, find someone who could help, and come back. She'd not changed clothes. She was wearing what she'd had on all evening, a forest green wrap she had bought on clearance 8 months ago from a department store near her apartment in the Bronx. It fit her the way she liked it, loose enough to be comfortable, the color good against her dark skin. She had not dressed for a gala. She had not known she would need to. She stepped off the elevator onto the ballroom level at 9:47 p.m. The doors to the main hall were open to let in air. The sound of the string quartet drifted out. Nia moved along the edge of the corridor toward the service entrance she'd noticed when they arrived that afternoon figuring she could flag down a hotel employee without having to go through the event itself. She never made it to the service entrance, because somewhere between the elevator bank and the side corridor, she made a wrong turn. The hotel's layout was more complicated than she'd realized. And before she understood what was happening, she had walked through one of the side entrances directly into the ballroom. But she stopped, looked around, understood immediately that she was in the wrong place. She started to back up. She never got the chance. "Excuse me." The voice was the kind of voice that had never needed to be raised to command a room. Lenora Whitcomb was 61 years old, 5'8" in heels that probably cost more than Nia's monthly rent, dressed in a gown that a fashion magazine would have called architectural. She was standing with a group of guests near the edge of the dance floor when she noticed Nia, and she turned the way a lighthouse turns fully, unhurriedly, with complete authority. "I think you may have wandered into the wrong room." The words weren't screamed. They weren't ugly in the theatrical way. They were said the way you might correct someone who had accidentally sat in your seat on an airplane. Patient, almost kind, which was the cruelest possible delivery, because it contained within it the assumption that Nia was simply too confused to understand the basic social geography of the situation. Several nearby guests turned. Someone laughed, a small suppressed sound, but audible. Nia felt it land in the center of her chest. She had felt that sensation before the sudden, specific weight of a room full of people deciding what you were, before you had said a single word. She had felt it at department stores, when salespeople drifted toward her with that particular kind of hovering attention. She had felt it in waiting rooms and parking lots, and on public transportation, and once, memorably, at a parent-teacher night she'd attended on behalf of a child she was caring for, when 3 other parents had assumed she was the custodial staff. She knew this feeling. It was not unfamiliar territory. But the public nature of it, the audience, the deliberate volume, the way Lenora had timed it for maximum witness, that was something else. Lenora wasn't finished. She looked Nia up and down with the measured attention of someone conducting an appraisal. "This is a private event. I don't know how you got in, but I'm going to need you to—" "I'm looking for water." Nia's voice came out steady. She was surprised, actually, by how steady it was. "I took a wrong turn. I'll be out of your way in a moment." Lenora tilted her head. The smile didn't move. "Water." She repeated the word as though it were an interesting choice of excuse. Then, to the woman standing next to her, a willowy blonde in a backless dress, she said, in a tone meant to be heard, "The caterers really need to do a better job managing who they're letting through from the kitchen." The blonde woman had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. But she said nothing. More guests were watching now. Nia counted, without meaning to, somewhere between 20 and 30 faces turned in her direction. Some of them curious, some of them amused, some of them wearing the expression of people watching something mildly unpleasant happen and waiting for it to be over so they could return to their conversations. Not one of them said anything. Not one of them took a step toward her. Lenora turned back to Nia with the expression of a woman about to deliver a final gentle lesson. "I'm sure you're very nice. But people like you and I don't mean that unkindly. People like you really should understand where these kinds of events are appropriate too." "I understand completely," Nia said. She said it quietly. No heat in it. No tremble. She reached out and picked up a glass of water from the nearest table, a small glass. Just enough. Still water. Not cold. Exactly right. And she looked at Lenora Whitcomb for exactly 1 second. Not with anger. Not with tears. With something that was harder to sustain and more devastating to witness, which was simple, absolute clarity. Then she walked out of the ballroom. Her back was straight. Her head was up. Her footsteps were even. She did not hurry. Hurrying would have been a concession, and she had decided, somewhere in the half-second between Lenora's words and her own response, that she was not going to make concessions tonight. Not for this room, not for these people. Nobody saw her hand tighten around the glass, hard enough that her knuckles shifted. Nobody noticed, or so she thought. Across the ballroom, standing near the north wall with a glass of sparkling water he had not touched, A man named Dae-Hyun Kwon had seen everything. He was not a man who was easy to notice in a crowd, despite being someone most people in certain circles feared considerably. He was 43, lean still, with the particular quality of presence that comes not from loudness, but from the sense that a person is perpetually calculating something. He had a face that gave very little away, and eyes that missed very little. He had been invited to this gala for the same reason rich and powerful people are always invited to the events of other rich and powerful people, because his name had value, and because Graham Whitcomb's international development deal needed his signature to move forward, and Lenora's gala was where Graham liked to do his preliminary socializing. Dae-Hyun had come because his attorney had told him it would be useful. He had spent the evening being politely agreeable and mentally somewhere else entirely. Until 90 seconds ago, he had watched the whole thing, from beginning to end. The wrong turn, the interception, the smile that wasn't a smile, the blonde woman's uncomfortable silence, the 30 faces that watched and said nothing. And then, the moment that he had not expected, the steadiness of Nia Holloway walking out of the room with a glass of water and her spine locked straight. He had not seen her face clearly. He had seen her back. He had seen the set of her shoulders. He turned to the man standing 2 feet to his left, a young, efficient Korean man named Jun-Hyu, who served as his personal assistant and had worked for him for 6 years. "Find out who she is," Dae-Hyun said. His voice was quiet, conversational. Jun-Ho did not ask questions. He simply nodded and stepped away from the wall. Dae-Hyun took a sip of his sparkling water and turned to look at the spot where Lenora Whitcomb was already resuming her conversation with the blonde woman, smoothing the front of her gown, her composure entirely restored. The incident to her was already over, already filed away, probably already being reshaped in the privacy of her mind into a story about the importance of proper security at these kinds of events. For the briefest moment, something moved through Dae-Hyun's expression that his employees had learned over the years to take very seriously. Then it was gone. He finished his water and set the glass down precisely on the nearest surface. Upstairs, Eli was still awake when Nia came back. His eyes tracked her immediately as she came through the door, the way sick children always track the one person they trust most in a room. She sat on the edge of the bed and helped him sit up slightly, holding the glass while he drank. Cool water. Not cold. Exactly how he liked it. "Better?" she asked. He nodded. His fever was the same, not worse, which was what mattered right now. She adjusted the blanket, checked his forehead with the back of her hand, got up to get the small thermometer from the medical bag she always traveled with when she was working, because Eli had a complex enough health history that preparation was not optional. She did all of this with complete focus, because Eli needed her to be focused, and because focusing meant she did not have to spend time processing what had just happened downstairs, the way you don't look directly at something that hurts too much to examine at full brightness. She had been a caregiver for 9 years. In that time, she had cared for 11 children, some short-term, some long, some whose families were warm and grateful, others who treated her with the particular indifference that comes from thinking of a person primarily as a service. She had learned early that the job had a specific emotional discipline to it. You were allowed to feel things, but you were not allowed to let those feelings contaminate the work. The work was about the child in front of you. Eli was the child in front of her. She took his temperature, 99.4, same as before. She made a small note in the health log she kept on her phone, noted the time, noted his water intake, noted his affect tired but alert, no significant distress. She sat back in the chair beside his bed and told him a story about a boy who lived near the ocean and collected things the tide brought in, which was Eli's second favorite story type. The first being anything involving a clever animal making a fool of someone larger and louder than it itself. He fell asleep somewhere in the middle of the part where the boy found a bottle with an impossible map inside it. Nia sat in the quiet room and listened to him breathe. And then, because she was alone, and it was quiet and he was asleep, and the work was temporarily not requiring her full attention, she let herself feel it. It moved through her in the way hurt always moved through her, not sharp, Not screaming, but a slow, spreading weight. She had been doing this long enough to know that the acute sting of a specific moment was not really the worst part. The worst part was the accumulation. The specific tiredness of spending your whole life being looked at by strangers who had decided your worth from across a room before you had spoken a word, before they had any information except what they could see, her size, her skin, her green dress from a department store clearance rack. She was not naive about this. She never had been. But she was 30 years old, and she was tired in the specific, grinding way that comes not from one wound, but from hundreds of small ones that have never quite healed before the next one arrives. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes for a moment. Not crying, not quite, just holding. She didn't hear the door until it was already open. Dae-Hyun Kwon stood in the doorway. He almost never came up this early in an evening. When he traveled for work, Eli's routine was Nia's responsibility, and Dae-Hyun's visits were usually brief, a hand on the boy's shoulder, a few quiet words, back to whatever business had brought them to the city. He was not a distant father, but he was a father who wore distance like armor, which Nia had come to understand was not the same thing. He looked at Eli first, the way parents look at sleeping children, checking, confirming, some fundamental fear, answering itself in the simple sight of the steady rise and fall of a chest. Then he looked at Nia, and Nia, because she was tired and had her hands pressed against her face and had not heard the door, had not yet had time to put her professional composure back together. He saw her face. He did not react the way most employers would have, with discomfort, with the reflexive desire to reassure and move on. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind him, with the careful quiet of someone who understood that a sleeping child's rest is not to be disrupted. "Miss Holloway," he said. "He's at 99.4, she said. Her voice was steady again. Fast recovery, same as an hour ago. He had some water, no vomiting, respirations normal. He should sleep through the night if the fever stays flat." Dae-Hyun did not sit down. He stood near the window, looking at her. "I'm not asking about Eli's temperature," he said. Nia lowered her hands from her face. "I know what happened downstairs," he said. She looked at him. It was nothing. It wasn't nothing. "Mr. Kwon, I watched it from across the room," he said. The whole thing. Silence settled between them. Outside, 30 floors below, the city continued in its perpetual motion, the sound of traffic like a distant ocean, the occasional wail of a siren rising and fading. Nia looked at Eli sleeping. "It happens," she said finally. "It's not the first time. It won't be the last. I handled it." "I know you handled it," Dae-Hyun said. "That's not the point." She looked at him then, really looked at him. He was still in his event clothes, a dark suit, no tie, collar open one button. He had the look of a man who had left the ballroom without saying goodbye to anyone, which was not a small thing for someone at a business event. His expression was the same as it usually was, carefully neutral, giving very little away. But there was something underneath it tonight, something that had not quite made it back behind the neutral face. "Then what is the point?" she asked. Because she was tired, and because tired had pushed her past the careful professional distance she usually maintained with the parents she worked for. Dae-Hyun was quiet for a moment. "She has no idea who you are," he said. She looked at you and decided she already knew everything she needed to know. And the room agreed with her. A pause. That should not have happened. With respect, Nia said, "Things that should not happen to people like me all the time. Understanding that is how you survive them." Dae-Hyun looked at her for a moment with an expression that she could not fully read. Then he nodded, once, slowly, as though she had confirmed something he already knew. "Get some rest," he said. "Eli's going to need you in the morning." He moved toward the door. "Kwon," she said. He stopped. "Thank you," she said, for saying something. He didn't turn around. "I haven't said anything yet," he said. Then he walked out. Nia sat with that for a long moment after the door closed. She looked at Eli. His chest rose and fell. His temperature was 99.4 and holding. His breathing was quiet and even. She reached for her phone and added a note to his log. 2000, 241 Hair-S patient sleeping, stable, no change. Then she leaned her head back against the chair and closed her eyes. She did not know what Dae-Hyun Kwon meant by yet. She would understand it soon enough. Junho had been working for Dae-Hyun Kwon for 6 years, and in that time he had learned to read the specific temperature of his employer's silences, the way a sailor learns to read weather. There were silences that meant, "I'm thinking." There were silences that meant, "I've already decided, and I'm waiting for you to catch up." And there was the particular silence that had settled over Dae-Hyun on the elevator, ride back up to the suite level. After he'd left Nia's room, a silence that meant something was already in motion. And the only question was how far it would go. Junho had sent 2 texts in the 20 minutes since Dae-Hyun had given him the instruction. The first to a contact at the hotel's staff administration office. The second to a woman named Sarah, who worked in what Dae-Hyun's organization formally called due diligence, and what everyone internally understood to mean something more comprehensive than that. By the time Dae-Hyun reached his own suite, Junho was waiting outside the door with a tablet. "Nia Holloway," Junho said, handing it over without preamble. 30 years old, born in the Bronx. Mother was a home health aide for 22 years, retired on disability 3 years ago. Father not in the picture, not since she was 11. She has one younger brother, Marcus, 26, works construction in Queens. He paused. She's been a licensed pediatric caregiver for 7 years. Before Eli, she had 4 long-term placements, all ended in good standing. 2 of those families sent letters of recommendation she never submitted anywhere. Just kept them. He paused again, as if that detail deserved its own moment. She's enrolled part-time in nursing school, Brooklyn Community College. 2nd year. Her GPA is 3.8. Dae-Hyun scrolled through the tablet without looking up. She clocked 53 hours with Eli last week, Junho added. Contract requires 40. Dae-Hyun stopped scrolling. The woman who spoke to her downstairs, he said, Lenora Whitcomb, 51. Married to Graham Whitcomb Construction, Development, Real Estate, 6 commercial projects currently in partnership with 3 European investment firms. The deal your legal team has been negotiating is the biggest of those, the Cross-Atlantic Infrastructure Project. Projected value over 18 months, conservatively, is $430 million. Dae-Hyun set the tablet down on the side table. He stood at the window. Below, the city at this hour was the color of embers, amber and white, and the occasional red pulse of a brake light dragging through the wet streets. "Cancel it," he said. Junho did not move for exactly 2 seconds. Which, for Junho, was a long time. "The Whitcomb deal," Dae-Hyun said, as though clarifying for someone who had not heard him. "Cancel it. The terms have been, I know what the terms have been. Cancel it." Junho exhaled through his nose. Not an argument. Just the sound of a man absorbing information that was going to create a significant amount of work. Graham Whitcomb will want a reason. He'll get one. Tonight? Tomorrow morning. Set a meeting for 8. Junho nodded. He's toward the door, then stopped. There was something that had been sitting in the back of his throat since the ballroom, and he'd been deciding whether to say it. He decided. "The room didn't say anything," he said. "The whole room watched. And nobody I know," Dae-Hyun said. Junho, the name, said quietly, with the specific flatness that meant this part of the conversation is finished. Junho left. Dae-Hyun stood at the window for a long time after the door closed. Graham Whitcomb was a man who had spent 40 years building the kind of confidence that comes from never having experienced a consequence he couldn't buy his way out of. He was 64, built like a former athlete who had made peace with the fact that the athletic part was behind him, with white hair that he wore as a kind of authority badge, and a handshake that was always slightly too firm. The handshake of a man who needed you to know immediately that he was not someone you could push around. He arrived at the breakfast meeting at 8, 3 minutes late, which was intentional, because Graham Whitcomb did not arrive on time to meetings with business partners. It implied too much equality. The hotel's private dining room was quiet at this hour. Dae-Hyun was already seated when Graham walked in, drinking coffee and reading something on his phone without looking up. That was the first thing that registered wrong, for Graham Dae-Hyun did not look up. Most people looked up when Graham Whitcomb walked into a room. "Day," Graham said, settling into the chair across from him, with the particular ease of a man who has decided this is a social call. "Thought we'd have more time last night to connect. Lenora's events run long, you know how it is." Dae-Hyun set his phone down. "I'm canceling the development agreement," he said. Graham blinked. "Just once." "I'm sorry?" "The infrastructure project. All of it. My legal team will send the formal notice this morning, but I wanted to tell you directly." Graham stared at him. The practiced ease of his posture was still there, but something behind his eyes had shifted, a rapid, private recalculation happening in real time. "That's Day. We've been at the table on this for 8 months. The framework is essentially, I know how long we've been at the table. Then help me understand what we're talking about here. Is this a terms issue? Because if there's a number..." "It's not a number." Graham leaned back, his jaw set in the way it did when he was working out whether he was being played. "Then what is it?" Dae-Hyun looked at him steadily. "Last night, your wife humiliated a woman in the middle of your ballroom. In front of a room full of people who watched and said nothing, because nobody wanted to be the one to contradict Lenora Whitcomb at Lenora Whitcomb's event. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a powerful man trying to figure out how seriously to take something. Graham chose in that moment to try the wrong approach. He laughed, not loudly, but he laughed. "Come on. If this is about I don't even know what incident you're referring to, but Lenora runs a very precise event, and sometimes guests wander in who..." "The woman is Eli's caregiver." Graham stopped laughing. "She was upstairs with my son all evening. She came down to get him water because the floor service wasn't responding, took a wrong turn, and ended up in your ballroom for approximately 90 seconds. Dae-Hyun picked up his coffee cup. "Your wife suggested she had no right to be in the room. Said it loud enough for 30 people to hear. Several of them found it amusing." Graham's expression had moved through several phases in quick succession: surprise, then the beginning of something defensive, then a careful blankness that was almost more telling than either. "Dae, you have to understand, Lenora didn't know." "I know she didn't know." Dae-Hyun set his cup down. "That's exactly the point." Another silence. "I don't do business with people I can't trust," Dae-Hyun said. "And I can't trust someone whose character only presents itself when they believe they're in a room full of equals. Whatever your wife is in private, what she showed last night was who she is when she thinks no one important is watching. That's the most honest version of a person." Graham's face had reddened by 2 degrees. "You're walking away from $400 million because my wife was rude to your babysitter." The word landed in the air between them. Dae-Hyun did not raise his voice. He did not change his expression. "Yes," he said simply. "That's correct." He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and picked up his phone from the table. "My attorneys will be in touch," he said. "I hope the rest of your morning is productive, Graham." He left without finishing his coffee. Graham sat alone in the private dining room for 4 full minutes before he called Lenora. Lenora was still in bed when her phone rang. She had the particular post-gala exhaustion that came after an event she'd spent 8 months orchestrating, and she had not slept well. Too much champagne, too much adrenaline that hadn't fully metabolized. She answered Graham's call with her eyes still half closed. By the time he finished talking, she was sitting up. He said, "What?" Her voice was flat in the way voices get when the brain is processing something too fast and the emotional response hasn't caught up yet. He canceled the deal, Lenora. $430 million in development partnerships, 8 months of negotiation, gone. Because of Graham stopped himself. "Because of what?" "Graham, what exactly did he say?" Pause. "He said his son's caregivers is the woman from last night." Lenora went very still. "The woman in the green dress," Graham said. She sat on the edge of the bed. The previous night rearranged itself in her memory with sudden unpleasant clarity. The woman, the water, the soft laughter from the people standing nearby. The way it had taken, altogether, maybe 45 seconds, and she had moved on from it the moment it was over. "That's impossible," she said. "Lenora, Dae-Hyun Kwon's son's caregiver is a woman like that?" She was wearing Graham. She didn't even... Doesn't matter what she was wearing. His voice had the hard, controlled quality it got when he was frightened, but didn't want her to know it. It matters that Kwon's walking away from the table, and he told me exactly why. Lenora stood up. Her mind was moving fast now, skimming the surface of several possible responses. This is about leverage. He's using this as a negotiation tactic. He wants better terms, and he needed a reason to... He didn't ask for better terms. He didn't ask for anything. He said his lawyers would be in touch, and walked out. She was quiet for a moment. "I'll call him," she said. "You will absolutely not call him, Graham. Listen to me." His voice dropped into the register he used when he was done discussing something. "Do not contact Dae-Hyun Kwon. Do you understand me? Let my team handle this." "Your team didn't handle it last night. My team wasn't," he exhaled sharply. "That's not the point. The point is that you need to stay away from this while I figure out how to." "Figure out how to what?" "Graham, this is not we are not losing that deal over a misunderstanding at an event. This is fixable. It doesn't feel very fixable from where I'm standing." The call ended badly. Calls between Lenora and Graham always ended badly when they were actually about something, which was most of the time, though they had both become expert over the years at having conversations that were technically about other things. Lenora set her phone down on the nightstand. She sat for a moment looking at the window. The green dress, the water, 45 seconds. She told herself it was an overreaction. Men like Dae-Hyun Kwon did not throw away 8 months of business negotiations because of a minor social incident. There was something else at work here. There had to be. She picked up her phone again and called her assistant. "Find out everything you can about Dae-Hyun Kwon's household staff," she said. "Specifically, who's taking care of his son." Nia did not know any of this when she woke up the next morning. She woke up in the hotel chair, which was not the first time she'd slept in a chair, and would not be the last. Her back registered its objection immediately, and she spent a moment breathing through it before she moved, checking Eli first still sleeping, breathing even. The gray-blue light of early morning falling across his face and making him look younger than he already was, which was saying something. His temperature was down to 98.8 when she checked it. She let out a breath she had not been entirely conscious of holding. She showered, changed into the spare set of clothes she kept in her bag, and had coffee from the room service cart that arrived at 7:15 before Eli woke up. When he did wake up, he was better still tired, still subdued, but the brightness was gone from his eyes, and he asked for toast, which was a good sign, because sick Eli did not ask for food. She was sitting on the floor beside his bed, helping him with a puzzle he'd been working on for 3 days, when the door opened and Dae-Hyun came in. He looked, for the first time in the 6 months she'd worked for him, like he had not slept. Not dramatically, it was not something most people would have noticed. The suit was immaculate, the posture straight, but there were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there yesterday, and the set of his mouth had a tightness that Nia had not seen before. Eli looked up immediately. Appa, the word dad in Korean, the one Eli used without thinking, the one that still crossed Dae-Hyun's face with an expression Nia had never been able to name, precisely landed in the room like it always did. Dae-Hyun sat on the edge of the bed and put his hand on the back of Eli's head. "How do you feel?" "Better," Eli said. "Nia made me drink a lot of water." "Good." He looked at the puzzle. "How many pieces left?" 40-something. "It's hard because the sky is all the same color." "It always is," Dae-Hyun said. He stayed for 20 minutes, helping with the puzzle, saying very little beyond what was required, doing the particular thing that Nia had noticed. He was quietly good at being physically present without demand, without the performance of engagement that some parents used because they didn't know how to simply sit. He just sat. He handed Eli pieces. He didn't check his phone. When Eli fell into a light sleep again, Dae-Hyun stood and followed Nia into the small sitting room that adjoined the bedroom. "Canceled the Whitcomb deal this morning," he said. Nia stared at him. "I'm sorry?" "The business agreement I was here to finalize." "Graham Whitcomb." He said it with the same tone he'd use to mention a change in Eli's medication schedule. "Factual. Already done." I told Graham why. She could not for a moment find the architecture of a response. Mr. Kwon, that you can't. She stopped, restarted. How much was that worth? That's not relevant. It's relevant to me. Because if it's what I think it was, then you just. She stopped again. Her heart was doing something she didn't entirely like. You can't do that for me. I didn't do it for you, he said. I did it because I don't do business with people whose character shows itself the way Lenora Whitcomb's did last night. That's the same thing, it isn't. Mr. Kwon Dae-Hyun. He said it without particular emphasis, the way he'd said it once before, 2 months into her employment, when she'd called him Mr. Kwon 14 times in a single afternoon. She hadn't used it once since. And it isn't the same thing, Miss Holloway. What happened to you last night mattered. It also happened to confirm something about the Whitcombs that I would have needed to know eventually. I simply know it now instead of 6 months from now. You're making it sound very logical, she said, and I understand that. I do, but there's a real person, who had to stand in that room last night, and she stopped, pressed her lips together. You can't fix what happened to me in that ballroom by blowing up a business deal. No, he agreed, I can't. That's not why I canceled it. She looked at him. Then why, specifically? And I want the actual reason, not the boardroom version. Something shifted in his face. A small shift, but she caught it. Because nobody in that room said anything, he said. 30 people, not one of them. And that is a room full of people who make decisions that affect other people's lives. And what they showed last night was how they make those decisions based on what someone looks like, who they appear to be, before any other information is considered. He paused. I've been in rooms like that. I've benefited from rooms like that. I've also been told to use a different entrance. His voice didn't change, but the last sentence landed differently than the others. I know what it costs, and I know that the people in that room will keep costing other people those same things, unless someone occasionally makes it expensive to be who they are. The sitting room was very quiet. Nia sat down in the chair by the window because her knees had decided independently that standing was no longer the plan. You should have told me before you did it, she said. Would you have asked me not to? She looked at her hands. Yes, that's why I didn't tell you. She laughed. Came out without warning a short, involuntary sound, not entirely humor. That's not how this works. I'm aware. He moved toward the door. I have calls this morning. Eli's follow-up with his cardiologist is Thursday at 2. I've confirmed the appointment and adjusted the car service. There's nothing else you need from me today? She stopped. No. He nodded, paused at the door, turned back slightly, not fully, just enough. For what it's worth, he said, the way you walked out of that room last night. With the water. The way you held yourself. He paused. That took more than any of those people in that ballroom will ever understand. Then he was gone. Nia sat by the window for a long time. Below the city was its usual indifferent self-taxis, pedestrians, a delivery truck double-parked, while a man in a yellow vest unloaded boxes. The ordinary motion of an ordinary morning that had, without announcing itself, become something else. The information Lenora's assistant compiled reached her by noon. Nia Holloway, pediatric caregiver, Bronx, nursing school. No social media presence beyond a private Facebook account, last active 8 months ago. Lenora read it twice. Looked at the photo her assistant had found a staff ID photo from a caregiver registry website, face forward, professional, the kind of photo where the person was clearly unused to being photographed in any official capacity. She sat with it for a while. Then she made a decision, which was the way Lenora Whitcomb had always operated, by making decisions and then figuring out how to execute them. The decision was this: she would approach Nia Holloway directly. Not through Dae-Hyun, not through intermediaries, woman to woman. She would explain that last night had been a misunderstanding, that she had not known, that the circumstances had been. She worked through the phrasing in her head several times, until she had a version she thought could hold weight. She was prepared to be apologetic. She was even prepared to be sincere, or a reasonable simulation of it. What she was not prepared for was Graham finding out she was planning to do this. He found out because her assistant, who had worked for her for 9 years, and it turned out had more loyalty to the shared infrastructure of their household than to Lenora personally mentioned it to Graham's chief of staff in the course of an administrative coordination call. Graham called her at 1:47 p.m. "You are not going to contact that woman," he said. "Graham, if I can defuse this before." "You're not going to defuse anything. You're going to make it worse. You're going to stand in front of Dae-Hyun Kwon's caregiver and try to explain yourself, and she's going to go straight back to him with whatever you say, and anything you say can and will be used as..." She's a caregiver. Graham, she's a woman that Kwon apparently cares about enough to walk away from $400 million, which makes her one of the most valuable people in our world right now. And you are going to stay as far away from her as possible. He was breathing hard. She could hear it. "I mean it, Lenora. This is not a discussion. Don't tell me what's not a discussion in my own. Our life, our money." His voice cracked at the edges in a way she hadn't heard in years. "This deal was the project, Lenora. You understand me? Not a project. Project. Everything we've been building toward for the last 3 years has been pointed at this. And you tanked it in 45 seconds because you couldn't stop yourself from Mayence." He didn't finish the sentence. She didn't make him. The silence on the line was the kind that accumulates when two people who have been married for 31 years simultaneously remember exactly how many times they have had this same argument wearing different clothes. "I'll stay away from her," Lenora said. She hung up. Then she picked up her coat, told her driver to take her to Brooklyn, and went to find Nia Holloway anyway. She had found out, through the assistant's research, that Nia attended classes on Tuesday and Thursday evenings at Brooklyn Community College. It was a Thursday. The class ended at 6:45. Lenora waited in the car across the street until 6:52, and then she got out. She had not been to in Brooklyn. She tried to remember and could not. Her world existed in Manhattan, in certain parts of the Hamptons, in select cities in Europe. Brooklyn was not a part of it. She stood on the sidewalk outside the community college's main entrance, in a camel hair coat that cost more than some of the students' monthly rents, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, like she was in the wrong room. She recognized Nia coming through the glass doors. In a group of 3 students, she was the tallest, wearing jeans and a navy sweatshirt with the college's name on it, carrying a backpack over one shoulder and a paper coffee cup in the other hand, mid-sentence with a young woman beside her about something that involved a lot of hand gestures. Lenora stepped forward. Nia saw her at 5 feet. The conversation stopped. The other students continued walking, then noticed that Nia had stopped and slowed, uncertain. "It's okay," Nia said to them, in a tone that was calm enough that they believed her, and kept walking. She and Lenora stood on the sidewalk in the cold November air, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. Lenora had prepared several versions of what to say. None of them came out. What she said was, "I didn't know who you were." Nia looked at her with an expression that was neither warm nor hostile, just attentive, the way you look at something you're trying to understand accurately. "I know you didn't," she said. "I wanted to." Lenora stopped. Started again. "I'd like to offer you something." As a gesture of to acknowledge that what happened was, "Are you about to offer me money?" Nia said. The directness of it stopped Lenora completely. She cleared her throat. "I was going to say that there might be a way to address what happened publicly, in a way that would You want me to call it a misunderstanding," Nia said. "Publicly. So that when Dae-Hyun Kwon hears about it, there's a different story out there." Lenora held her gaze. "I'm trying to make this right." "No," Nia said. Her voice was still level, still without heat. "You're trying to fix something that's hurting you. That's different." She shifted the coffee cup to her other hand. "Mrs. Whitcomb, I've spent my whole life in rooms where someone like you looked at someone like me and made a decision in about 3 seconds. And I've spent my whole life figuring out how to keep moving anyway, because the alternative is to stop." She paused. "What happened in that ballroom was not unusual. You are not a uniquely cruel person. You're just the most expensive one who's ever done it to me." Lenora opened her mouth. And I know you're scared right now, Nia continued. I can see it. I think this might actually be the first time in a long time that something has happened to you that money didn't immediately solve. And I am not happy that you're scared. That's not what I want. She looked at Lenora with a steadiness that was harder to meet than anger would have been. But I'm not going to stand in front of a camera and call it a misunderstanding. Because it wasn't. You knew exactly what you were doing. You just didn't know it would matter. The pause that followed was very long. You're sorry, Nia said, because you found out I mattered to someone powerful. That's not the same thing as being sorry for what you did. Lenora Whitcomb, who had not been at a loss for words in a social situation since approximately 1987, had nothing. Nia shifted her backpack on her shoulder. I have to get home, she said. My shift starts early tomorrow. She walked past Lenora to the curb, raised her hand for a cab, and was gone in under a minute. Lenora stood on the sidewalk in the November cold. She did not notice until she was back in her car and her driver was pulling into traffic. The man standing near the corner coffee cart, 20 feet away, middle-aged, unremarkable in a gray jacket, holding a cup and a phone. The phone pointed, for a period of approximately 4 minutes, in the direction of the two women on the sidewalk. His name was Peter Malik. He was a freelance journalist who had been working on a piece about the Whitcomb Foundation's charitable activities for the better part of 3 months, and he had followed Lenora from Manhattan on a tip from a source he would never name. He looked at the footage on his phone screen. He looked at it for a long time. Then he made a call. I've got something, he said. I'm going to need more time on the foundation piece, because I think there's something much bigger underneath it, and I think tonight just confirmed. Peter Malik had been in journalism long enough to know the difference between a story that could end careers. The footage on his phone was the second kind. He sat in his car outside a diner on Atlantic Avenue and watched it 3 times. 4 minutes and 11 seconds of Lenora Whitcomb standing on a sidewalk outside Brooklyn Community College, in a coat that announced its price from 20 feet, speaking to a woman in a nursing school sweatshirt who was carrying a backpack and a paper coffee cup. The audio was thin street noise, a bus passing at the 2-minute mark, but enough of the words came through. Enough. You want me to call it a misunderstanding? I'm trying to make this right. No. You're trying to fix something that's hurting you. He had not planned to be there tonight. He had been in Brooklyn because his source, a mid-level accountant who had worked for the Whitcomb Foundation's financial arm for 7 years before quietly resigning, 4 months ago had asked to meet at a coffee shop on Flatbush, and the source had not shown up. And Peter had been sitting in his car, deciding whether to wait another 20 minutes, when the alert had come through his phone. A social media post from someone who recognized Lenora Whitcomb getting out of a car in front of Brooklyn Community College. The kind of post that meant nothing to most people, and everything to a journalist who had spent 3 months trying to find the edges of what the Whitcomb Foundation was actually doing with its money. He had gotten there with 4 minutes to spare. Now he sat in his car and thought about what he had, and what he still needed, and the specific arithmetic of how much of one you needed before you could justify going with the other. What he had, footage of Lenora Whitcomb attempting to privately negotiate with a woman she had publicly humiliated at her own charity gala 2 nights earlier. That alone was a tabloid story, a good one, the kind with a photograph and a pointed headline and 2 days of social media heat before it burned out and everyone moved on. What he suspected he had, underneath it, something considerably worse. He called his editor at 11:14 p.m. I need more time on the foundation piece, he said when she picked up. Something's moved. His editor, a woman named Carol DeFries, who had been running the investigative desk for 11 years and had the specific exhaustion of someone who had heard something's moved approximately 900 times, said, How much time? A week, maybe 10 days, a pause. What changed? I think the gala incident and the foundation irregularities are connected. I think Lenora Whitcomb went to Brooklyn tonight to pay off a witness, and I think the reason she's scared enough to do that in person, without lawyers, without intermediaries, is because she knows something is about to come apart, and she's trying to control the edges. Another pause, longer. Peter, if you're wrong about the connection. I know. The foundation has 3 lawyers on retainer who will eat this publication for lunch if we run something we can't fully substantiate. I know that too. 10 days, Carol said. And I want a memo by Monday, laying out what you have and what you still need. He was already typing when she hung up. The memo never made it to Monday, because by Friday morning everything had changed. The social media post about Lenora Whitcomb in Brooklyn had been screenshotted and shared through the night, and by 6 a.m. on Friday, it had reached the kind of critical mass that meant the story was no longer Peter Malik's to control. 3 entertainment news sites had already picked it up. A gossip columnist who covered Manhattan's social scene had a post up by 7:30 that used the phrase charity gala confrontation in the headline and had Lenora Whitcomb's publicist's phones ringing before most of the stuff had arrived at the office. By 9 a.m., the clip, someone on the sidewalk had also filmed part of the exchange. Shakier footage, worse audio, but the visual of the camel hair coat and the nursing school sweatshirt was unmistakable, had been viewed 240,000 times on a single platform. By noon, it was 1.3 million. Nia Holloway found out about it from a classmate who texted her a link at 7:52 a.m. with 3 question mark emojis. She was on the subway, heading back to the hotel to relieve the overnight nurse, who had stayed with Eli, when she opened the link and watched herself on a stranger's phone screen, walking away from Lenora Whitcomb on a Brooklyn sidewalk. The audio was bad, but the moment was clear, the set of her shoulders, the deliberate, unhurried motion of a woman who had decided the conversation was over. Caption on the post read, "Is this the woman from the Whitcomb Gala? Looks like Lenora went to find her." Wonder what she said. Nia stared at the screen for a long moment. The subway car rattled through the tunnel. A child across the aisle was eating a granola bar with enormous concentration. The woman next to Nia was asleep against the window. She closed the link and put her phone in her pocket and sat very still for the remainder of the ride. Dae-Hyun had already seen it by the time she arrived. Junho had sent him the link at 6:19 a.m. before Dae-Hyun had finished his first coffee, with a message that said simply, "You need to see this." Dae-Hyun had watched the clip twice, then called Junho, then spent 40 minutes on the phone with his legal team, and then another 20 minutes in a conversation with a woman named Yuna Park who handled, in the specific language of her contract, strategic communications for his organization, and whose actual function was considerably more comprehensive than that phrase suggested. By the time Nia knocked on the suite door at 8:40, Dae-Hyun had been awake for 3 hours and had made 11 phone calls and had eaten nothing. He opened the door himself, which was unusual. He looked at her for a moment. "You've seen it," he said. On the subway. He stepped back to let her in. Eli was still asleep. It was a non-school day. And the overnight nurse, a quiet Filipino woman named Rosa, who smelled of lavender and institutional coffee, gave Nia a brief handover report and let herself out. Nia stood in the sitting room. Dae-Hyun was at the window. "She came to me," Nia said. "I didn't go to her. I want to be clear about that." "I know. She wanted me to publicly say it was a misunderstanding." "I know that too." She looked at him. "How much of my life do you have people monitoring?" "Exactly." Came out with more edge than she intended. He turned from the window and met her gaze directly, which she had noticed was something he did when he thought the question deserved a straight answer. "I don't have anyone monitoring you," he said. "I had someone monitoring Lenora Whitcomb. You were the reason, but the surveillance was on her, not you. There's a distinction. That's a very fine distinction." "Yes," he said, "it is." She sat down, pressed both palms flat on her knees. "What happens now? Now it gets complicated," he said. "The footage is already beyond containment. Too many people have shared it, which means Lenora's team is going to have to respond, and whatever response they construct is going to draw more attention to the original incident, which means more attention to why she went to Brooklyn in the first place, which means reporters start asking questions about her foundation," Nia said. He looked at her. "I went to school for nursing," she said. "Not because I'm slow." Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile. "Close enough." "No," he said, "you did not." Nia looked at her hands. "I didn't want this. I want you to know that. What I said to her last night, I meant it. I don't want her destroyed. I wanted her to understand something. She paused. There's a difference. There is, he agreed. But I don't think she understands that difference. And I don't think the internet understands it either. And I think what's about to happen is going to be a lot bigger than one woman being rude at a party. Yes, Dae-Hyun said. It is. He crossed to the chair across from her and sat down. It was the first time she had seen him sit in a casual posture in 6 months, not the formal arrangement of a man in a business meeting, but a person settling into a chair because standing had stopped being useful. It made him look for a moment like someone who was tired. 3 months ago, he said carefully, I had people begin looking into the Whitcomb Foundation's financial records. Not because of what happened at the gala that hadn't happened yet, because certain patterns in their public filings suggested to my team that the charity's operational costs were structured in a way that was inconsistent with the scope of their stated work. He paused. What we found requires context, which is why I didn't act on it immediately. Nia was very still. What did you find? He looked at her steadily. The foundation has 7 pediatric health clinics listed as primary charitable beneficiaries. Those clinics exist, they're real. But the funding that was supposed to reach them was being redirected at the disbursement level, through a series of subsidiary accounts, into political action infrastructure that supports Graham Whitcomb's candidates in 3 state legislative races. He paused. The amount, over 4 years, is approximately $18 million. The room was very quiet. Children's clinics, Nia said. Yes. She sat with that for a moment. She understood, in a specific and personal way, that Dae-Hyun could only approximate what a pediatric clinic meant to the neighborhoods they were supposed to serve. She had grown up in the Bronx. She knew which corners had clinics and which corners did not, and she knew what it cost, in real human terms. When a family had a sick child, and no place close, and no car, and no ability to take a morning off work, to travel to a hospital across the borough. She knew this not abstractly, but from having lived inside the specific geography of not having enough. $18 million. You were going to turn this over to investigators, she said. Process was already in motion before the gala, he said. What happened at the gala changed the timeline. How? Because now it's public. Because now there's a journalist, Peter Malik. He's been working on a foundation piece for 3 months. My team came aware of him 6 weeks ago, who has footage that will lead him directly to the same questions we've been asking. And when a journalist is asking those questions publicly, the window for a quiet regulatory process closes. Nia looked at him. You're telling me this because you think I should know before it explodes. I'm telling you this because you're in it whether you want to be or not. Your face is in a video that has over 1 million views. By Monday, that will be 10 million. Lenora Whitcomb came to you, in public, in front of a camera, to try to buy your silence. And you told her no. He paused. That footage is going to become the image associated with this story, which means your face is going to be associated with whatever this story becomes. She absorbed this. I need to call my mother, she said. It was not what he expected her to say. He did not say that. He simply nodded. She stood up, went to check on Eli, still sleeping, breathing steady, color better than last night. She tucked the blanket up slightly and stood there for a moment, looking at him. Then she went to the hallway and called her mother. Bernice Holloway answered on the second ring, because Bernice always answered on the second ring, a habit from 22 years of being a home health aide and always needing to be reachable. You seen it? Nia said. Baby Marcus called me at 6 in the morning. 6 in the morning. I know, Mama, he sent me the video. And then he sent me 4 more versions of the video. And then he sent me an article that called you. Bernice's voice had a particular texture when she was controlling herself, a tightness that Nia could read as clearly as words. They called you unidentified woman in confrontation with socialite. Like you don't have a name. I have a name. They'll find it. Nia, I'm okay. You don't sound okay. I'm okay, she said again, with more weight on it this time, the way you say something when you need the person you're talking to believe it. Because if they don't believe it, you might stop believing it yourself. I'm at work. Eli's doing better. I'm fine. A pause. That woman came to find you. Yes. She went all the way to Brooklyn. Yes, Mama. What did she want? She wanted me to say it was a misunderstanding. The silence on Bernice's end had a very specific quality. Nia knew her mother was sitting at the kitchen table, which is where Bernice sat for all important phone calls, with her coffee cup in front of her and both hands wrapped around it. What did you say? Bernice asked. I said no. Another silence. Then, good. It's going to get messy, Nia said. There's more to this than just what happened at the party. Can't explain all of it right now, but it's going to be on the news and people are going to be calling you, and I need you to not answer any calls from numbers you don't recognize. Nia. Her mother's voice was flat. I have been a black woman in New York for 61 years. You don't need to tell me how to handle people trying to get something out of me. But despite everything, Nia almost smiled. Okay. Marcus is already angry, Bernice added. He wants to go somewhere and yell at someone. I told him to stay home. Good. Tell him to keep staying home. He's not going to like that. He never does. She leaned against the hallway wall. I love you, Mama. I love you too, baby. You eat something this morning? I had coffee. That's not food, I know. Nia. I'll eat. I promise. She hung up and stood in the hallway for a moment, and the moment lasted longer than she intended. And during it, she was aware of something moving through her chest that was not panic exactly, but was the close cousin of it, the dawning physical comprehension of how large something has become while you weren't watching it grow. She went back into the suite. Eli was awake. He was sitting up in bed with his puzzle, the difficult one with the all-blue sky, and he looked at her with his too serious eyes when she came in. Is something wrong? He said. 9 months of caring for sick children had taught Nia that children who spend a lot of time in rooms with worried adults develop an extremely finely tuned instrument for detecting when the adults in the room are pretending everything is fine. A little bit of a complicated morning, she said, but nothing you need to worry about. He looked at her for a long moment with the evaluating expression that made him seem 40 years old sometimes. Then he looked back at his puzzle. Appa was talking on the phone since really early, he said. Like before it was light. He has a lot of work, she said. He always has a lot of work. Eli pressed a puzzle piece into place with one finger. But today it sounds different. Nia sat on the edge of the bed. What does it sound like? He thought about it with the seriousness he brought to everything. Like when something is already broken and you're trying to figure out which pieces are still okay. She looked at the side of his face. 8 years old. Congenital heart condition. A father who ran operations. She was professionally careful not to know too much about. A world that had already asked more of him than it had any right to. You're a very smart kid, she said. I know, he said, without vanity. Just fact. Peter Malick's Monday memo to Carol DeFries was 17 pages, single-spaced, and it arrived in her inbox at 4:52 a.m. because Peter had not slept. By the time Carol had read it twice and forwarded it to the publication's legal team, it was 8 a.m., and the legal team's senior partner called her at 8:24 with a voice that had climbed 2 register higher than usual. Carol. Where did he get the disbursement records? His source. His source is a former foundation accountant. That's what the memo says. And these are, Carol, if these numbers are accurate, I know. This isn't a charity scandal. This is a federal issue. Diversion of charitable funds for political purposes at this scale is a federal issue. I know that too. A pause. We need to verify every number independently before we even think about it. I know. That's why I need the authorization to bring in a forensic accountant. Today. The pause that followed was the sound of institutional risk calculation happening in real time. How solid is the source? 7 years at the foundation. Full access to disbursement records for 5 of those years. Left voluntarily, signed no NDA, and Peter has the documents. Carol set down her coffee cup. The source didn't just remember this. They kept copies. Another pause. Authorize the accountant, the lawyer said. And Carol, not a word outside this conversation, until we have independent verification. Obviously, she hung up and stood at her office window, looking at the street below for a long moment. Then she called Peter. The accountant is approved, she said when he answered. But I need you to understand something. If we run this story and the numbers don't hold up under independent verification, the Whitcombs' lawyers will come after this publication with everything they have. And I mean everything. She paused. Are you certain your source is solid? Yes. How certain? She kept the documents for 4 years, Peter said. You don't keep documents for 4 years if you're uncertain. Carol said nothing for a moment. She said irrelevant to the story. I know, She stopped, recalibrated. Get me everything you have by Wednesday. Physical copies, not digital. He was already moving. What happened next arrived the way disasters usually arrive, in the lives of people who have been pretending they won't suddenly, and then all at once. Graham Whitcomb found out about Peter Malick's investigation on Tuesday afternoon. Not from a journalist, not from a lawyer, and not from any of the monitoring services his communications team used to track coverage of his name. He found out from a man named Daniel Voss, who sat on the Whitcomb Foundation's board of directors and who had received a call from a forensic accountant asking to schedule an interview for purposes of independent verification of Foundation financial records. Daniel Voss called Graham from his car on a Tuesday, which was not a thing Daniel Voss did. Daniel Voss sent emails. He had sent Graham Whitcomb a total of 4 phone calls in 11 years of working together. The fact of the call itself, before Graham even answered, told Graham that the world had changed. There's a forensic accountant, Daniel said. Someone's building a case. Graham was in his office on the 38th floor of a building he partly owned, behind a desk, made of materials that cost more than some cars, looking at a view of the Hudson that he had spent 30 years earning the right to look at. He felt the floor shift under him, in the way floors shift when you are on a high level of something tall and you suddenly become aware of how far up you are. Which accounts, he said. His voice was very controlled. Daniel named them. The specific accounts he named were the subsidiary accounts. The ones that connected the Foundation's disbursement records to the political action infrastructure. The ones that, if followed carefully, by someone who knew what they were looking at, formed a clear and unambiguous trail from money that was supposed to go to children's clinics in underserved communities to a network of political action committees that had spent 4 years electing Graham Whitcomb's preferred candidates to state legislative positions that directly governed construction and development contract approvals. Graham sat very still. Who's the journalist? He said. I don't know yet. Find out. Today. Graham. Daniel's voice had something in it that Graham did not immediately recognize, because it was something he did not often hear directed at him, which was the sound of someone who has already made a calculation that does not include you. I'm calling to tell you that I received this contact. I'm telling you as a courtesy. I want to be very clear that whatever response you construct, it doesn't involve me. The line went quiet. Daniel, I mean it, Graham. I'm not in this. I was on the board in an advisory capacity, and I had no visibility into those disbursements. That's the truth, and that's what I'll say if anyone asks. A pause. I suggest you talk to your lawyers tonight. He hung up. Graham sat in his 38th floor office for a long time. The Hudson was silver in the afternoon light. A container ship was moving very slowly south. He watched it without seeing it. Then he called Lenora. She answered on the first ring, which told him she had been waiting. I know, she said before he spoke. Daniel called you too? His wife called me 20 minutes ago. Her voice was the flattest he had heard it in 31 years of marriage. Not emotional flatness, something more fundamental. The flatness of a person who has looked at something and understood it completely and is still in the process of deciding how to feel about what they understand. It's the Brooklyn thing, isn't it? That's what opened it. Lenora, if I hadn't gone to Brooklyn, if you had just let me, she stopped. Don't. If I hadn't gone to that sidewalk, there's no footage. There's no story about the gala. There's no journalist circling. The journalist was already circling, Graham said. His voice came out harder than he intended. 3 months, Lenora. Malick has been at this for 3 months. This didn't start with you going to Brooklyn. But that's what broke it open. He did not answer. She sat with his silence, and it told her what she needed to know. Graham. Her voice had changed. Something underneath the flatness had surfaced, not grief, not quite, but the near neighbor of it. What exactly is in those accounts? He said nothing. Graham. Harder now. Tell me what is in those accounts. We should do this with lawyers present. I don't want lawyers. The flatness was gone entirely now. In its place was something raw and specific. I want you to tell me, right now, what I have been putting my name on for 4 years. Because my name is on the foundation. My name is on every letterhead, every gala, every press release about those pediatric clinics. Her voice broke not into tears, but into the particular fracture of a person understanding something they cannot ununderstand. Were those clinics real? The clinics are real, he said. They exist. But the money, the clinics received partial funding. The remainder was redirected, she said. He said nothing. Graham. Her voice was barely above conversational volume now, which was the most frightening it had ever sounded to him in 31 years. Tell me you did not use children's medical funding for your political campaigns. Tell me right now, with your actual voice, that that is not what happened. The silence lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds was all the answer she needed. What followed was not a fight in the way. Their fights usually were not the practiced, well-worn argument that fit a groove worn smooth by decades of repetition. What followed was something new, something that neither of them had experienced before in the architecture of their marriage, which was the sound of one person, discovering that a foundation they have been standing on for years was never solid, and the specific, irreversible quality of that kind of falling. She said things that she had not said in 31 years. He said things that were a different kind of revelation, not cruel, but worse, honest, in the way people are honest when they have stopped calculating the cost. When the call ended, Lenora was standing in the middle of her living room in a way that suggested she was not entirely sure how she had gotten there from wherever she had been sitting. Her phone was in her hand. The room was very bright. The light from the windows was that particular flat winter light that makes everything look both overexposed and very cold. She stood there for a long moment. Then she went to her desk, opened the top drawer, and took out a number she had written in her own handwriting on a card 3 weeks earlier, her private attorney's number. Not the attorney she and Graham used for foundation matters. Not the attorney the family's business interests since retained, but a private attorney who had represented her as an individual in 2 matters that Graham had never known about. Called the number. I need to come in tomorrow, she said when it connected. Early, before 8 if you can. She paused. And I need to know whether spousal privilege applies when your husband has been redirecting charitable funds through accounts that your name is also on, because I need to know right now whether I am a witness or whether I am a defendant. The attorney said something. Lenora closed her eyes. Then I'll be there at 7, she said, and Lenora Whitcomb arrived at her attorney's office at 6:53 in the morning. She had not slept. This was visible in the specific way that sleeplessness shows itself on people who are accustomed to controlling their appearance, not dramatically. Not in the theatrical ruin of someone who has been crying all night, but in a kind of granular erosion. Precise architecture of her presentation, maintained for decades through effort and discipline and a comprehensive understanding of how other people, red surfaces, had slipped by maybe 3%. Enough that the receptionist, a young man who had worked in the building for 2 years and had seen Lenora Whitcomb in the elevator 4 times, looked up when she walked through the door and then looked again. She sat in the waiting room for 4 minutes. She did not take out her phone. She sat with her coat still on and her hands folded in her lap and looked at the middle distance with an expression that was not readable as anything specific, which was itself a kind of information. Her attorney, James Carver, opened his office door at 6:57 and waved her in without pleasantry. Carver was 68, a former federal prosecutor who had spent the last 20 years on the defense side and who had the specific manner of a man who had heard everything and been surprised by almost none of it. He sat across from her at a desk that was notable for its lack of ornamentation, no family photos, no degrees on the wall, Nothing that could be read as personal information by the people who sat across from him, which was a choice, not an oversight. Tell me what you know, he said. All of it. From the beginning. Don't edit, Lenora told him. It took 41 minutes. She spoke without the social performance she brought to every other conversation in her life. No careful modulation, no audience management, no version of events crafted for best reception. She spoke the way people speak when they are frightened, and the person across from them is the only thing standing between them and something with teeth. She told him about the gala, about Graham's deal with Dae-Hyun Kwon, about Brooklyn and Nia Holloway and the footage, about Daniel Voss's wife's phone call, about the conversation with Graham that had ended with 4 seconds of silence that told her everything. When she finished, Carver was quiet for a moment. He had not written anything down. You signed the foundation's letterhead, he said. Yes. Annual reports. Disbursement authorizations. Some, not all. Graham handled the operational side. But your signature is on documents. Yes. Did you review the documents before you signed them? She met his gaze. I trusted Graham. Carver absorbed this without expression. That's not a legal answer, Lenora. I know. Did you have reason to believe the documents contained inaccurate information? No, not until last night. He leaned back slightly. The accounts Graham used to redirect funds, are any of them in your name alone, or in your name jointly with Graham? I don't know. You don't know. I don't have visibility into the subsidiary accounts. I'm on the foundation board in a titular capacity. I chair the gala committee. I approve programming budgets. I don't. She stopped. Something crossed her face that was close to the thing people's faces do when they are confronting, in real time, the shape of their own choices. I didn't ask to see the financial architecture I should have. I didn't. Carver nodded slowly. Here's what I need you to understand before we go any further. If federal investigators are already building a case and based on what you've described, I have to assume they are, or will be within days, the window for any kind of proactive cooperation is narrow and closing fast. Once charges are filed or formal investigations are announced, the landscape changes completely. He paused. Is there anything that has said you anything at all that suggests he's already in contact with investigators? That he might be looking at cooperation himself? Lenora was very still. The question arranged itself in her mind, and she turned it over carefully, the way you handle something that might be sharp. Graham had said, let my team handle this. Graham had said, don't contact that woman. Graham had said, we should do this with lawyers present. He had not said, I have a lawyer already. But the precision of what he had not said was suddenly interesting. I don't know, she said, slower than before. I don't know if he already has. Carver looked at her steadily. If Graham is cooperating before you do, the first one to the table gets the better arrangement. That is not a negotiating metaphor. That is simply how this works. He paused. I'm not telling you to act rashly. I'm telling you to understand the arithmetic. Lenora sat with this. Outside the window, the city was conducting its early morning business in the way it always did, indifferently, loudly, without reference to what was happening in this room or in any of the rooms where human beings were sitting with the wreckage of their decisions. A garbage truck was doing something noisy below. A bus went past. The light was gray and flat and honest. What do I need to bring you? She said. Carver reached for a legal pad. Everything, he said. Start with whatever personal financial records you have access to that are separate from Graham. I need to know exactly where your name appears and exactly where it doesn't. And I need to know, he paused. Is there anything else? Anything beyond the foundation accounts that I should know about before someone else tells me? Lenora looked at the window. There are documents, she said. Graham's documents. Things he kept in the home office. She paused. I know where he keeps the hard copies. Carver set down his pen. I'm going to stop you right there and explain something about what you can and cannot legally do with your husband's documents. She listened. Her face during this explanation went through several things that she was experienced enough to keep mostly internal. When he finished, she said, and if I found them in a shared space, a space we both use? Carver looked at her for a long moment. Then we'd have a different conversation, he said. Dae-Hyun received the call from his legal team at 9:15 a.m. on the same Tuesday morning that Lenora sat across from James Carver. He was in the hotel gym, which was where he went, when the variables in a situation had exceeded what a seated posture could process. He had been on a treadmill for 30 minutes at a pace that was punishing but not irrational. And he was beginning to feel slightly more like a person and less like a problem to be solved when his phone vibrated on the treadmill's side panel with the specific pattern he'd set for calls from his lead attorney, a woman named Michelle Cho, who had represented his organization's legal interests for 8 years and who did not call during gym hours unless the situation required it. He stepped off the treadmill and answered. "We have a development," Michelle said. "Tell me." The forensic accountant hired by Malik's publication has formally requested access to the Whitcomb Foundation's public filings through the state attorney general's office. That's a public record request, which means it's documentable, which means the Whitcombs know it's happening. Our contacts at the AG's office are telling us there's been internal discussion about whether to open a formal inquiry, which would move this from journalism to law enforcement. Dae-Hyun picked up a towel from the rack and held it without using it. How quickly? If the Foundation's records are as compromised as the documents we passed to investigators 3 weeks ago suggest, the AG's office could open formally within 48 hours. Maybe less if they're already further along than our contacts know. 3 weeks ago, he had made that decision before the gala, before any of this had become public, before Nia Holloway had walked into a ballroom in a green dress and changed the temperature of everything. He had made it because the numbers were wrong, and because when numbers are wrong at that scale, it means people who should have received something didn't. And he had a son who required pediatric medical care and understood in a granular way what it meant for that care to exist in the places where people needed it most. He had not made it for the gala. He had not made it for Nia. But the gala had changed the speed of it, and Nia had changed what it meant to him, that the speed had changed. And he was aware. In the careful way, he tried to be aware of things that could compromise his judgment, that these were related, and that the relationship required monitoring. "What do you need from me?" he said. "The documents we submitted 3 weeks ago are going to be sourced eventually. The chain of custody is clean, but when the Whitcomb's attorneys start looking for who initiated this, your name is going to come up." "Fine. Dae-Hyun." Michelle's voice had the particular quality it got when she was to say something she had rehearsed. "The organizations that are going to be implicated in the disbursement trail, some of them have connections. Not to you directly, but to people in your industry who operate in overlapping spaces. If this goes federal and the investigators start following every thread, they won't find anything that isn't already documented and accounted for," he said. "My operations are clean. I know that. I'm the one who made them clean." A pause. "I'm saying that the optics of a criminal investigation that was initiated by someone with your professional history is going to attract a different kind of scrutiny than the same investigation initiated by, say, a journalism nonprofit." He was quiet for a moment. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that it might be useful to have a more prominent public narrative about why this investigation started. Something that doesn't lead with your name." He thought about the footage. 1.3 million views yesterday, more by now. Nia Holloway on a Brooklyn sidewalk, refusing an offer from a woman who had everything except the understanding that she had done something wrong. "The footage is already doing that," he said. A pause. "You didn't plan for that." "No, but it happened, and it's true." He paused. "The truth of why this investigation started is that a woman was humiliated in a public place, and nobody said anything. That's the truth. Let it be the narrative." Michelle was quiet for a moment. "And Miss Holloway, she's going to be at the center of a federal investigation story, whether she wants us to be or not. I'm aware. Does she know that? She's beginning to understand it." "Dae-Hyun." Michelle's voice dropped a half register. "She's a nursing student from the Bronx who came to a hotel to get water for a sick kid. She didn't sign up for any of this. I know what she signed up for," he said. "I'll handle it." He hung up and stood in the empty gym. Treadmill was still running, counting time he was no longer spending on it. He reached over and turned it off. The thing about Junho was that he was almost never surprised, which made the moment he knocked on Dae-Hyun's suite door at 11 a.m., with an expression that had moved 2 degrees past its usual controlled neutrality, more significant than it would have been on anyone else. Dae-Hyun opened the door, looked at him. "Graham Whitcomb is downstairs," Junho said. "Beat. He doesn't have an appointment," Junho added, as though this required clarification. "He arrived 11 minutes ago. He told the front desk he's here to see you. He doesn't have security with him. He's alone." Dae-Hyun considered this for a moment. A man like Graham Whitcomb did not arrive anywhere alone. He traveled with the infrastructure of his own importance, assistance, security, the ambient suggestion that his time was structured and protected and not subject to the spontaneous demands of other people's agendas. The fact that he was standing in a hotel lobby unaccompanied at 11 in the morning meant that something had happened or was about to happen that he had not wanted anyone who worked for him to witness. "Bring him up," Dae-Hyun said. Junho's expression suggested a professional opinion about this, but he said nothing and went. Graham Whitcomb, when he came through the door, 4 minutes later, looked like a man who had spent the previous night in a room with something he couldn't outrun. The white hair was the same. The posture was almost the same. But the handshake he extended was not the handshake of a man who needed you to know immediately. He was not someone you could push around. It was the handshake of a man in a hallway. Dae-Hyun did not take it. Not conspicuously, he simply moved slightly to one side, in a gesture of directing Graham toward the sitting room, which meant the extended hand found nothing and withdrew. Graham sat down. Dae-Hyun did not. "I'll be direct," Graham said. "Please. There's an investigation opening. You know this." "Yes." Graham looked at him with the expression of a man who has decided that certain pretenses are no longer affordable. "The documents that were submitted to the AG's office 3 weeks ago, before the gala, before any of this became public." He paused. "That was you." Dae-Hyun said nothing, which was itself an answer. Graham nodded slowly, absorbing it. "The Whitcomb deal was never about the deal," he said. "The deal was real," Dae-Hyun said. "I would have signed it if you were the people I needed you to be. But you were already investigating us. I was investigating the foundation's financials, because the numbers didn't add up. That's standard due diligence on any partner at that investment level." He paused. "What I found was not what I expected to find." Graham was quiet for a moment. His hands were on his knees, very still, in the posture of someone who has stopped performing. "What do you want?" he said. "I don't want anything from you." "Everyone wants something." "Not from you." Dae-Hyun moved to the window. The city below was its usual restless self. The investigation is proceeding through the appropriate channels. I'm not the one who controls it now. Whatever happens next happens because of what's in those accounts, not because of anything I decide. Graham looked at his hands. "Lenora didn't know," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not the person you need to be clear about that to." She signed documents. Her name is on the letterhead. If investigators look at Graham, Dae-Hyun's voice was quiet, but it had an edge in it that had not been there before. The edge of a man who has been patient for as long as patience was appropriate. "I'm not your attorney. I'm not your confessor. And I'm not going to be part of any conversation about how to manage the consequences of what you did." He paused. "If Lenora is innocent of the financial misconduct, then the investigation will establish that. If she isn't, it will establish that too. That's what investigations are for." Graham stood up. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Turned. In his face, underneath the controlled surface, was something that was almost recognizable as the feeling of a man confronting the real and specific cost of who he had been for a very long time. "The pediatric clinics," he said. "They were real. I want you to know that. The work we were doing there was real. The children who needed funding that was redirected to your campaigns were also real," Dae-Hyun said. Graham flinched. One small involuntary movement. Then he left. Nia found out the investigation had gone formal at 2:17 p.m. on a Wednesday, not from Dae-Hyun, not from the news, but from Marcus, who texted her a screenshot of a breaking news alert with a message that just said, "Nia." Look, she was in the middle of helping Eli with his physical therapy, exercises, a twice-daily routine of specific movements designed to support his cardiac function, which Eli did with the concentrated determination of someone who understood that his body required more maintenance than other people's and had decided to take this seriously rather than resentfully. She saw the message, held up a finger to Eli 1 minute, and stepped into the bathroom. The alert read, State Egg opens formal inquiry into Whitcomb Foundation amid allegations of fund diversion. Charitable contributions reportedly redirected from pediatric clinics to political action committees over 4 years. She stood in the bathroom with the phone in her hand. In the mirror across from her was a woman she recognized, but sometimes had trouble connecting to heavy set, dark-skinned, wearing scrubs with a small stain on the left cuff from Eli's breakfast. Hair pulled back in the practical way it needed to be for a 12-hour shift. 30 years old. Nursing student, Bronx. The woman in the mirror had become, in the last 4 days, something the internet was calling the woman from the gala, and something Peter Malick's article, which had published that morning, which she had read on her phone at 5 a.m. before Eli woke up, described as the incident that appears to have catalyzed a cascade of events, ultimately leading investigators to the Whitcomb Foundation's financial irregularities. Catalyzed a cascade of events. She had gone to get water for a sick kid. She set the phone down on the bathroom counter and looked at herself for a long moment. Then she went back to Eli and helped him finish his exercises. The internal meeting in Dae-Hyun's organization happened on Wednesday evening in a private room at a restaurant in Midtown that was closed on Wednesdays for exactly this purpose. There were 7 people at the table, Dae-Hyun at the head, Michelle Cho to his right, Junho to his left, 4 other men whose functions within the organization covered operations, finance, security, and what was internally called external relationships, which was a phrase that required no further explanation in that room. The man responsible for external relationships was named Choi Sung-jun, and he was 54 years old and had worked for Dae-Hyun's family organization in one capacity or another since Dae-Hyun was 26. He was the only person in the organization who had known Dae-Hyun's father, and he carried that history in the specific way of someone whose loyalty predated the person they were loyal to. Sung-jun had a problem with what had happened. He had been too disciplined to express it until tonight, but the discipline had limits, and tonight was where they were. The Whitcomb investigation is good, he said, after Michelle had finished her summary of where things stood legally. Clean, properly structured. I have no concerns about our exposure. He paused. What I have concerns about is the reason it became public when it did. Dae-Hyun looked at him. Go ahead. We submitted those documents 3 weeks ago. Quietly. Through the appropriate channels. It would have proceeded quietly. Sung-jun's voice was even, but there was something under the evenness that had been there all evening, and that everyone at the table could feel. Then the gala happened, and instead of maintaining the distance that makes this clean, we are now the connective tissue in a story that is on the front page of every news outlet in this city. Because of a woman. The word landed on the table with a specific weight. Dae-Hyun was very still. A woman, Dae-Hyun said, who was publicly humiliated in a room full of people who did nothing. With respect, Sung-jun said, that happens to people every day. We don't blow up 8-month business negotiations every day. I made a judgment. You made a personal judgment. In a context that is supposed to be professional. Sung-jun's voice had climbed very slightly in temperature. For him, this was the equivalent of shouting, you have a son with a medical condition who requires consistent, high-quality care. The woman who provides that care is excellent at her job. I understand that she matters to you. I understand that what happened to her was wrong. He paused. I am asking you to help me understand why that translated into a decision that has now placed your name adjacent to a federal investigation. The table was very quiet. Michelle Cho was looking at her water glass with the focused attention of someone who has decided not to be in this part of the conversation. Place my name adjacent to it, Dae-Hyun said. Or put it there correctly. Sung-jun looked at him. I initiated that investigation because the numbers were wrong, Dae-Hyun said. That is still true. It was true before the gala. The gala changed how I felt about the people involved. Did not change the financial reality. He paused. As for the Whitcomb deal, I don't do business with people whose character I don't trust. That's not personal. That's how I've run this organization for 17 years. You know that. What I know, Sungjun said, is that 17 years ago you would have made this decision after the investigation concluded. Not before. Not in response to watching someone get their feelings hurt at a party. He stopped himself. Recalibrated. I am not diminishing what happened to Miss Holloway. I am asking whether you can see clearly right now. About this situation. About her. The question settled into the room and nobody moved it. Dae-Hyun looked at Sungjun for a long moment, with an expression that was carefully neutral in the way that only very controlled people can be carefully neutral about things that are not actually neutral to them. I can see clearly, he said. Then I want to ask you something directly, Sungjun said. And I am asking it as someone who has worked for this family for 27 years and who is asking out of loyalty and not out of any other motive. He paused. What is Miss Holloway to you? The silence lasted 5 seconds. Which, in that room, was a very long 5 seconds. She's my son's caregiver, Dae-Hyun said. Sungjun held his gaze. And she's someone who deserved better than what happened to her. Dae-Hyun's voice didn't change in volume or tempo. And she's someone I respect. Those things are not complicated. They become complicated, Sungjun said, when they affect operational decisions at this scale. Noted, Dae-Hyun said. Is there anything else? It was not a question. It was the end of that conversation, said in the voice he used when something was done. Sungjun sat back. He was not a man who expressed defeat in any visible way. He simply stopped. The rest of the meeting was procedural. When it ended and the others had gone, Junho lingered. He stood near the door with his coat over his arm and waited until the room was otherwise empty, which was something he almost never did. Dae-Hyun looked at him. He's not wrong, Junho said. That's not what I'm saying. He stopped. Started again. You should tell her. Before this gets any bigger. Whatever it is, you're not saying to her, you should say it. Because if she finds out the size of what's coming from a news alert on her phone instead of from you, that's not something you fix easily. Dae-Hyun looked at him for a moment. I'll handle it, he said. Junho nodded. Put on his coat. I know you will, he said. I just think maybe you should handle it tonight. He left. Dae-Hyun sat alone in the private room for a while. The restaurant was silent around him, the specific silence of a place built for noise that is now empty. A single light above the table, his reflection faint in the dark window across from him. He thought about what Sungjun had said, and he thought about it with the ruthless honesty he tried to apply to things that concerned him, which meant he turned it over until he found the parts of it that were true, and sat with those parts without flinching. Was his judgment compromised? He examined the question seriously. He had initiated the investigation before the gala. That was true. He had canceled the Whitcomb deal for reasons that were defensible on professional grounds. That was true. He had made a decision to tell Graham Whitcomb why, directly and clearly, in a way that most people in his position would not have made. And that decision had been made not from strategy, but from a conviction that some things needed to be said plainly. That was the part he had to be honest about. He thought about Nia in the hotel chair, with her hands pressed against her eyes. He thought about Nia on the Brooklyn's sidewalk with the coffee cup and the backpack. He thought about the 6 months of watching someone do a job with a kind of steadiness that was not the performance of competence that people put on for employers, but the actual unobserved thing, the thing that persisted when nobody was watching and no credit was available. He thought about Sungjun's question and the 5 seconds he had spent not answering it. Then he picked up his phone and called Nia. She answered on the 3rd ring. He could hear, in the background, the specific sound of Eli's evening routine, the television on low, some animated program, the sound of small movement. He settled, she said, reading his hesitation. He had a good day. Good. He paused. I need to talk to you. Not about Eli. Pause on her end. Tonight, she said, if that's possible. Another pause. He heard the sound of a door closing in the background. She had moved into the hallway or the sitting room. The television sound became distant. "What happened?" she said. "Nothing tonight. But something is going to happen in the next 24 to 48 hours. And I need you to know what it is before it does." Pause this time was longer. "This is bigger than the gala," she said. It was not a question. "Yes." "And I'm in it." "Yes." He heard her exhale. Not quite a sigh, something more considered. The sound of a person deciding something. "Okay," she said. "Come tell me." He was already on his way to the elevator when his phone buzzed with a message from Michelle Cho that read, "Graham Whitcomb's attorneys contacted the AG's office this afternoon. Cooperating. He's giving them everything." Dae-Hyun stopped walking. "Read the message again." Graham cooperating meant the investigation moved faster. It meant the accounts would be opened, the disbursement trail would be documented, some subsidiary connections would be mapped. It meant the story that Peter Malik was publishing in pieces would have official confirmation within days. It meant the Whitcomb Foundation story was no longer a journalism story. It was a criminal proceeding, and everything associated with it, including the gala, including the footage, including the face of a woman in a nursing school sweatshirt, refusing to accept money from a terrified socialite on a Brooklyn sidewalk, was about to become the public face of a federal case. And it meant one other thing, which Michelle's message spelled out in a second line. Graham is also providing documents related to Lenora's involvement. His attorneys are claiming she had direct knowledge of the redirection. That's true, so the spousal cooperation strategy she may be planning with Carver just became significantly more complicated. Dae-Hyun stood in the hallway outside the elevator with the phone in his hand. Graham Whitcomb, faced with the arithmetic of who gets to the table first, had not chosen to protect his wife. He had chosen himself. Dae-Hyun stood in the hallway outside the elevator with Michelle's message on his screen and understood, in the specific way that people who have spent their lives reading other people understand things, that this had always been the most likely outcome. Graham Whitcomb was a man who had spent 40 years building structures designed to protect Graham Whitcomb. The foundation was one of those structures. The marriage was another. And when the structures started coming down, a man like Graham would not stand in the rubble and wait. He would pick up whatever was still useful and walk away from the rest. What he had not calculated, what perhaps he could not have calculated because it required a quality of imagination he had demonstrated he did not possess, was that Lenora Whitcomb, standing in her living room at 11 p.m. the previous night with a phone in her hand, and 4 seconds of her husband's silence echoing in her memory, had already begun to understand what kind of man she had been married to. Dae-Hyun called Michelle back. "Lenora's attorney," he said. "James Carver. He needs to know that Graham's cooperation package is being built against her." Pause. "I can't call Carver. Attorney-client issues." "I'm not asking you to call him. I'm asking whether there's a channel through which that information could reach him before tomorrow morning." Another pause. Longer. Michelle was a woman who understood the difference between what was said in a conversation and what the conversation was actually about. "There might be," she said carefully, "if someone who isn't me and isn't formally connected to our legal team happened to be aware of the situation." "Make sure someone is aware," Dae-Hyun said. "Tonight." He hung up and continued to the elevator. He was not doing it for Lenora Whitcomb. He was clear about that in his own mind, with the rigor he tried to apply to his motivations, especially the ones that could be mistaken for sentiment. He was doing it because Graham Whitcomb had decided to burn his wife to protect himself, and because allowing that to happen without the counterweight of information being equally available was a kind of participation in it. And Dae-Hyun Kwon had spent 17 years building an organization that operated on the principle that power without accountability was a tax that someone else always paid. He had seen in that ballroom what happened when power went unaccountable. He was not going to replicate it. Nia was in the sitting room when he arrived, which was where she went when Eli was settled, and she needed to be awake, but not intrusive. She had the small lamp on, the one by the window that gave the room a quality of light that was closer to amber than white, and she was sitting with a nursing school textbook open on her lap that she was clearly not reading. Because when he knocked, she looked up with the expression of someone who has been waiting for a sound and not looking at the thing in front of her. Closed the book. He sat in the chair across from her. Did not take off his coat immediately, which meant he had not decided yet how long this would take. Tell me, she said. He told her. He told her about the investigation, the timeline, the documents he had submitted 3 weeks before the gala. He told her about Graham cooperating. He told her about Michelle's message. He told her what it meant, in real and specific terms, for the story that was already public to become a criminal proceeding. And what a criminal proceeding meant for the people at its edges, the people who hadn't committed crimes but whose faces and names and actions had become attached to the story in ways that would not cleanly detach. He told her, specifically and without softening it, what it might mean for her. She listened to all of it without interrupting. This was something he had noticed about her. In 6 months, she did not interrupt. She listened with her whole attention, the kind of listening that is actually rare, the kind that comes from having spent years in rooms where you had to understand what was actually being said rather than what was being presented. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. You started the investigation 3 weeks before the gala, she said. Yes. So what happened to me that night was separate from the investigation. Yes. She looked at her hands, then at him. But it made you move faster. He considered how to answer this. He tried, as he always tried with her, to be accurate rather than strategic. It confirmed something I already believed, about the Whitcomb's character. It didn't change the facts of what was in those accounts. But he paused. Yes, it made the decision to cancel the deal easier. And it changed what this meant to me personally. What does it mean to you personally? The question was direct. He had learned, in 6 months, that her directness was not aggression, it was efficiency, the directness of someone who did not have the luxury of circling. It means that the people redirecting money from children's clinics were also the kind of people who stand in a ballroom and tell a woman she doesn't belong there, in front of 30 witnesses, and expect that to be the end of it. He paused. Those things are not separate. They're the same quality of character expressed at different scales. Nia sat with this for a moment. You should have told me sooner, she said. About the investigation. Yes, before it was public. Yes, because now I find out alongside everyone else, which means I have no preparation time and no ability to... She stopped, pressed her lips together. I'm not angry, she said, in the careful tone of someone making sure the statement is true before they say it. She stopped again. I needed to know Dae-Hyun. I needed to be in this with information, not just in it. He looked at her. The use of his name the first time she had used it, without being prompted, registered somewhere that he did not examine immediately. You're right, he said. I know I'm right. A beat. What happens now? She said. The investigation proceeds. Graham's cooperation accelerates it. Lenora's position becomes complicated very quickly. He paused. The story continues to be public. Your name is already connected to it, which means reporters will continue trying to reach you. I can arrange for a communications person to... No, she said. No communications person, no spokesperson, no managed narrative. She said it without heat, but with the firmness of someone who has thought about this and arrived at a position. I went to get water for a sick kid. I'm going to keep being a person who got water for a sick kid. The moment I start managing a narrative, I become something else. He nodded slowly. Okay, I'm going to call Peter Malik tomorrow, she said. I'm going to give him one interview, on my terms at a place I choose, with no photography. I'm going to tell him what happened to me in that ballroom and what I said to Lenora on that sidewalk. And I'm going to tell him that those things happened to a nursing student from the Bronx who was doing her job, and that I hope the money gets to the clinics it was supposed to reach, and then I'm going to go back to doing my job. She paused. And I'm going to ask him to print my name, not unidentified woman, not the caregiver, my name. She said this last part with a quiet insistence that had nothing performative in it, not defiance, not statement-making. Just the simple refusal of a person to be a symbol when she was a person. Dae-Hyun looked at her for a long moment. Okay, he said again. You're not going to argue with me about the interview? No. Most people in your position would want to control. I know what most people in my position would want, he said. You told me what you're doing. It's your decision. He paused. For what it's worth, I think it's the right one. She looked at him with the slightly evaluating expression she used when she wasn't sure whether to believe something. Then she seemed to decide to believe it. Go home, she said. Eli's fine. I'll call you in the morning if anything changes. He stood up, put on his coat, which he had never fully taken off. Moved toward the door. Dae-Hyun, she said. He stopped. She was still sitting in the amber light, with the closed textbook on her lap, in her scrubs with the stain on the cuff, looking at him with an expression that he had not seen her use before, which was the expression of someone who is about to say something that costs them something. Thank you, she said. Not for any of the not for the business decisions, or the investigation, or any of that. She paused. For that night. In this room. When you told me it wasn't nothing. When I was sitting here, and you looked at me, and you said it wasn't nothing. She looked at her hands for a moment. It mattered. I need you to know that it mattered. Stood at the door. It wasn't nothing, he said. He left. The next 11 days happened, the way the final stage of a structural collapse happens not all at once, but in a sequence of failures, each of which made the next one inevitable. Graham Whitcomb's cooperation with the State Attorney General's office was confirmed publicly on a Thursday. His attorneys released a statement the same day, indicating that he was providing full disclosure of the foundation's financial operations. The statement was 22 words long. It said nothing about Lenora. Lenora's attorney, James Carver, had received information through a channel he would later describe only as a private contact the previous night that Graham's cooperation package included documentation intended to implicate her in the fund redirection scheme. Carver had called her at 6 a.m. Their meeting at 7 a.m. had lasted 4 hours. By 11 a.m., Lenora Whitcomb had made a decision that the woman who had stood in that ballroom 10 days earlier and told a heavy-set black woman in a green dress that she had wandered into the wrong room would not, in any simple way, have recognized as something she was capable of. She released the documents from Graham's home office. Not all of them, not in a way that was legally inadvisable. Carver had been extremely clear about the specific geography of what was permissible. But what she released, through her attorney to the AG's office, were records that showed, in Graham's own handwriting and meeting notes, he had apparently never considered might become evidence. That Lenora had been told the subsidiary accounts were administrative consolidation accounts and had been given no further detail. That the signature she had put on disbursement authorizations had been presented to her as routine operational paperwork. That when she had once, 18 months earlier, asked Graham directly about discrepancies in the Foundation's annual report, he had told her it was an accounting error that his team had corrected. She also released the records of that conversation, which Graham had apparently not known she kept. A habit, Carver told the AG's investigator, that she had developed early in her marriage and had maintained because she was, underneath everything, a woman who had learned not to entirely trust the structures she lived inside. The documents did not exonerate Lenora completely. She had signed things she should not have signed without reading. She had trusted where scrutiny was required. She had built her social identity around a foundation whose financial operations she had treated as beneath her attention. But they established, with the kind of clarity that makes investigators' jobs straightforward, that Graham Whitcomb had deliberately managed the information available to his wife in order to ensure her plausible deniability could not be used, and simultaneously her signature could. He had built her into the structure specifically to be useful if the structure failed. When this became public, the social media response had a different quality than the original gala footage. The gala footage had generated anger, the specific, clean, shareable anger of a clear injustice committed in public. This generated something more complicated and less comfortable, which was the recognition of how many people had been, in their own lives and at various scales, the person who signed things they didn't read because they trusted someone who had decided that their trust was a resource to be managed. Peter Malick's full investigation piece ran on a Sunday. It was 14,000 words. Nia's interview, which she had given in a coffee shop in the Bronx on a Tuesday afternoon, occupied approximately 800 of them. She had worn her nursing school sweatshirt. She had asked him not to photograph her, and he hadn't. She was quoted by name saying, "I went to get water for a sick kid, and I ended up in the wrong room, and someone decided that was the right moment to tell me where I belonged." That's not an unusual thing to happen to someone like me. What was unusual was that someone with power saw it and decided it mattered. I'm still figuring out what to do with that. Her name was in the headline. The scholarship announcement came 6 weeks after the investigation went public. Dae-Hyun did not make the announcement himself. He had never intended to the foundation that administered it. It was a pre-existing educational nonprofit that his organization had partnered with 3 years earlier. And the scholarship program for nursing students from underserved communities was structured as an expansion of existing programming, not a new creation. The paperwork had been in process for 2 months. The gala had not created it. The gala had made him move faster. Nia received the notification, the way she received most things that mattered, by reading something on her phone in a quiet moment and sitting with it for a long time before she responded. She was in the break room at the community clinic where she had been volunteering 1 Saturday a month for the past Esker, which was a thing she did without telling employers because it was not something she did for professional reasons. She was eating a sandwich that was mostly bread. It was 1:17 p.m. The notification was from the nonprofit, not from Dae-Hyun. It outlined the scholarship terms: full tuition for her remaining nursing school credits, a stipend for the final year, and a practicum placement at one of 3 new pediatric community clinics being developed through a partnership between the nonprofit and a private investment organization. She read it twice. Then she called Dae-Hyun. He answered on the second ring. "Scholarship," she said. "Yes. Tell me this isn't tell me you didn't build this for me." "I didn't build it for you." His voice was even. And she had learned, in now 7 months, to hear the difference between the evenness that was performance and the evenness that was just how he spoke when he was telling the truth. The program has been in development since the spring. The criteria were established before the gala. You qualify for it because of your academic record and your community health work and your enrollment status, not because of anything else. Dae-Hyun, I'm telling you the truth. She sat with this, looked at the break room wall, which had a poster about hand there since before she started volunteering, and would probably outlast them all. "Why nursing students from underserved communities specifically?" she said. "Because those communities have the highest pediatric health deficits and the lowest number of locally trained nurses. It's a structural problem with a structural solution." He paused. "And because your mother was a home health aide for 22 years. And there are 1,000 women like your mother who produce children like you. And those children have a 3.8 GPA and 8 years of caregiving experience and no access to the financing that would let them finish what they started." She was quiet for a moment. "You looked into my mother," she said. "I looked into you," he said, "the night of the gala." Junho put together a summary. "I know, you told me." She paused. "You didn't tell me about my mother. I didn't think you'd want to know what I knew about your mother." She sat with this for a while. It should have bothered her more than it did. She had turned this over before. The question of what she was comfortable with in terms of how much someone like Dae-Hyun Kwon knew about someone like her, and she had arrived at an answer that was pragmatic rather than comfortable. He had known from the beginning. He had used what he knew to pay attention rather than to construct leverage. And that distinction was one she had decided to treat as meaningful. "I'm going to accept it," she said. "Good. I want it documented that I qualified on merit. I want the criteria public. They're already public. Check the nonprofit's website." She pulled it up while they were talking. The criteria were public. She checked them against herself, the way she checked Eli's vitals, systematically, without ego. She met all of them. She met most of them by a margin. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. A pause. The kind of pause that has something in it. "How's Eli?" she said. "Better. His last cardiology appointment, the numbers were the best they've been in 2 years. His doctor used the word stabilizing. She closed her eyes for a moment. In the specific professional part of her that had spent 7 years with sick children, she knew what it cost to hear a doctor use the word stabilizing about a child you had been watching and worrying about. And she knew what it cost not to show how much it cost. She had spent 7 months being careful with how much she let herself feel about Eli, for exactly the reasons that all good caregivers have to be careful about how much they let themselves feel, because the job requires a sustainable distance, and sustainable distance requires a boundary. And the boundary had been, in the 7 months of early mornings and puzzles and temperature checks, sex and stories about boys collected things the tide brought in, considerably more difficult to maintain than she had anticipated. "That's good," she said. Her voice came out slightly lower than she intended. "He asks about you," Dae-Hyun said. "He wants to know when you're coming back." She was currently between placements. Her contract with the Kwon household had run its original 6-month term and been extended twice, the second extension ending 2 weeks ago. She was in a transitional period, a professional euphemism, for the specific grinding anxiety of a caregiver between jobs living on savings and the Saturday clinic volunteering and the nursing school structure that gave the week shape. "Tell him I'll come by this week," she said. "I want to hear about the cardiology appointment in person." Pause. "Come for dinner," Dae-Hyun said. She was quiet for a moment. "That's different from coming by," she said. "I know." Another pause. Longer. The break room was very quiet. Somewhere down the hall a door opened and closed. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday," he said. The Whitcomb story resolved the way institutional stories resolved, not with a dramatic conclusion, but with a sequence of procedural events that accumulated into consequence. Graham Whitcomb entered into a plea agreement with the State Attorney General's office that involved substantial financial penalties, the dissolution of the foundation, and a period of supervised release. His attorneys negotiated the agreement over 6 weeks, with the thoroughness of people who understood that their client had, by cooperating first, bought himself a better version of a bad outcome. Lenora's situation was more complicated, and ultimately different in kind. The documents she had provided, combined with the documented record of how Graham had managed her information access, resulted in her being classified as a cooperative witness rather than a defendant. She was not charged. She paid no fine. She signed consent agreements related to her future involvement with charitable organizations. She gave a deposition that lasted 2 days, and when it was over, she walked out of the federal building on a gray February morning into a city that was no longer the city she had inhabited 3 months earlier, not because the city had changed, but because the social architecture that had defined her place in it had quietly, permanently changed shape. She had lost, in the course of 3 months, the following things: the foundation she had built over 15 years, the political connections that depended on the foundation's continued operation, the marriage which she and Graham had separated from formally in January, papers filed by Graham's attorneys on a Thursday that Lenora had spent in her apartment reading and rereading James Carver's explanations of what the documents said and what her options were. She had lost the annual gala, which would not happen this year or any subsequent year under the Whitcomb name. She had lost the certainty that had underwritten all of it, the conviction that she understood the rules of the world she lived in well enough to be safe inside them. What she had at the end of it was harder to name. James Carver told her, in their final billing conversation, that she had handled a catastrophic situation with more strategic intelligence than most of his clients managed. She had thanked him and written the check without discussing the amount. She had not contacted Nia Holloway again. She had thought about it. On several occasions and in several moods, she had drafted, in her head, various versions of what she would say, and in every version the problem was the same, which was that the only thing she genuinely had to offer was an apology that she now understood would not land as apology, but as the latest chapter in her ongoing attempt to manage the consequences of having failed to understand that another human being was a human being before she understood that this person mattered to someone powerful. Nisa had said it to her on a sidewalk in November. You're sorry because you found out I mattered to someone powerful. That's not the same thing as being sorry for what you did. Lenora sat with this for a long time, months. She did not contact Nia. The clinic opened on a Thursday in early April, which was a coincidence that nobody planned and nobody commented on. It was a pediatric community clinic in a neighborhood in Queens that had been without pediatric services, within walkable distance for 11 years. The building had been a warehouse, converted over 8 months by a construction firm that Dae-Hyun's organization had contracted through the nonprofit, and the interior was the color of light, pale yellow walls, large windows, floors that were cleaned to the kind of standard that told families who walked through the door that someone had taken their children seriously before they arrived. The opening was not a gala. There were no chandeliers, no string quartets, no women in architectural gowns air-kissing over champagne. There was coffee in paper cups and folding chairs arranged in rows, and the head of the nonprofit speaking at a microphone about wait times and pediatric deficits and what it meant for a neighborhood to have access within walking distance, and then 2 local council members who spoke for longer than necessary, and then the noise of the doors opening, and then the noise of the doors opening and the families from the neighborhood beginning to come through, which was the part that was actually the event. Nia was there. She was not there as a speaker or a representative or symbol of anything. She was there because she had earned a practicum placement through the scholarish. And her first day at this clinic was today, and she had arrived 40 minutes early in her scrubs with a bag over her shoulder and her hair up, and she had spent those 40 minutes helping the nursing staff set up intake forms and locate the supply cabinet and figure out why the 3rd examination room's overhead light was flickering, which turned out to be a loose connection that she fixed herself with a step stool and a flathead screwdriver she found in the maintenance closet. Dae-Hyun arrived at 10:15 with Eli, who was wearing a jacket over his school clothes because the morning had been cool and because Eli was the kind of child who, now that he was healthier, brought an enormous and specific attention to what he wore. Each outfit apparently selected according to criteria that he kept largely private. Eli saw Nia first. He walked across the room with the directness of a child who has identified the person he was looking for and has no patience for the geography between himself and that person. He stopped in front of her. "You work here now," he said. It was not a question. "Someday," she said. He considered this. "Is it better than the other places? Ask me in a month." He accepted this with the seriousness he brought to most things. Then he looked around the room at the families finding seats, the children moving through the new space with the specific investigative energy of children in a new place, a toddler attempting to eat a pamphlet near the intake desk. "It smells like paint," he said. "It's new," she said. "I know it's new." He looked at her. "It's good, though, that it's new." He paused, with the exact expression of someone choosing their words carefully. Some places feel new because they're trying to look nice. This one feels new because it didn't exist before. She looked at him for a moment. "You're a very strange 8-year-old, she said. "I know," he said without vanity, still just fact. Dae-Hyun reached them a moment later. He had been stopped by the nonprofit's director near the door, and he came across the room with the slightly contained quality he carried in public spaces, the awareness of being observed. He stopped beside Eli and looked at Nia. "You found the supply closet," he said, noticing the screwdriver she was still holding. 3rd exam room light was out. She held it up, fixed. He looked at the screwdriver, and then at her, and something happened in his face that she had seen before, in small moments, and that she had never quite been able to name, not a smile exactly. Something quieter. Something that occupied the space between recognition and satisfaction. "You've been here 40 minutes, he said. 47, she said. Eli looked between them with the evaluating expression that made him seem 40 years old. "Can I see the exam rooms?" he said. "The ones that work." Nia looked at Dae-Hyun. Dae-Hyun looked at Eli. "Ask Nia," Dae-Hyun said. Eli turned back to her. She tucked the screwdriver into her bag. "Come on then," she said. They walked down the hallway, the boy in his careful jacket, the woman in her scrubs, the April light coming through the windows in long, clean bars across the pale yellow walls. The clinic was filling behind them, the sound of it slowly, voices and movement, and the particular busy sound of a place beginning to do what it was built to do. Dae-Hyun stood at the end of the hallway and watched them go. He had thought for 17 years that power was the ability to make people afraid. He had built an organization on that understanding, and it had worked in the specific and limited way that things built on fear work efficiently until they don't. He had watched his father operate on the same understanding, and he had watched what it cost in the accumulated currency of what his father had not been able to be for the people who needed him to be more than feared. He had a son who was stabilizing, who used the word appa without thinking, who had a practitioner who had spent 7 months caring for him with a quality of attention that no amount of money could have manufactured. He stood in the hallway of a clinic that existed in a neighborhood that had not had one for 11 years. And he thought about Sung Jun's question, "What is Miss Holloway to you?" and the 5 seconds he had spent not answering it. He thought about what the real answer had been, and was, and whether he would have the occasion to say it plainly. He thought about Thursday dinners. Eli's laugh came from somewhere down the hall, a genuine one, the kind that startled out of a child without permission. Nia's voice followed it, saying something too quiet to hear from this distance, and then Eli's laugh again. Dae-Hyun leaned one shoulder against the wall. The light through the windows was exactly the color of the morning. Outside, a woman was walking toward the clinic entrance with a child on her hip and a folded paper in her hand, the address on it, checking it against the number above the door. Stopped, looked up at the building, looked at the paper again. Then she straightened up, shifted the child to her other hip, and walked through the door. Nobody asked her if she had wandered into the wrong room. Nobody had to decide whether she belonged. She walked in, and someone at the intake desk looked up and said, "Good morning," and that was the whole of it, the entirety of what it required, when the door was built for the people who needed to walk through it. Nia came back down the hallway alone, Eli having apparently found something in exam room 2 that required his extended attention. She stopped beside Dae-Hyun, and they stood together for a moment, watching the room fill. "How does it feel?" he said. She thought about it. She was someone who thought before she answered, which he had noticed in the first week and had valued in every week since. "Like the first day of something," she said. "The kind where you don't know yet what it'll cost you, but you're going in anyway." He looked at her sideways. "Is that good?" She looked at the room. The woman with the child on her hip was being handed a clipboard. The toddler had been redirected from the pamphlet and was now investigating a chair leg. 2 older children were sitting in the corner, one reading, one doing something complicated with a shoelace. "Yeah," Nia Holloway said. "That's good." She went back to work.